The day we moved in, I thought I had everything I ever wanted: a new home, a fresh start, a chance to grow old with grace beside my only son. But the way he looked at me when I called it our home made something inside me wither like the last leaf of autumn. I hadn't expected the silence. Even now, as I sat in the kitchen that gleamed with quartz countertops and chrome fixtures, the air around me felt sterile, like a hotel suite where no one had lived long enough to leave a mark. The ticking of the wall clock was louder than anything my son had said to me all morning. Or maybe that's because he hadn't said anything at all. "Daniel," I called gently, placing 2 cups of chamomile tea on the island counter. "Come, it's still hot." He stood by the hallway arch, arms crossed, eyes vacant. "I told you, Mom. I've got work. No time for tea." I nodded, swallowing the lump in my throat. He was 42 now, successful, sharp-jawed, and painfully distant. This house was supposed to bring us closer. I had sold the old family cottage in Vermont, taken every cent from the savings Frank and I had built across a marriage of 40 years. After Frank passed, I thought Daniel might need me more. I was wrong. He just needed the house. The paperwork had been swift, his name on the deed, my contribution forgotten in the fine print. "I'm just a guest in my own dream," I murmured as I stirred the tea, watching the swirl of honey disappear into the steam. "You said something?" "No," I lied. "Nothing." That evening, I wandered the upstairs rooms. Each one pristine, lifeless, designed with a precision that left no space for comfort. Daniel had hired decorators before I even saw the place. "I wanted it to feel fresh," he said, "not weighed down by the past." The past. That was me. I was the past. In the guest roomy room, as Daniel had clarified, I opened the box I hadn't touched since the move. Inside were yellowing photos, Frank's old gardening gloves, and a letter Daniel had written me in 5th grade. "You're the best, Mom. I hope we live together forever." I clutched it, tears stinging the edges of my tired eyes. I missed that boy. I missed the way he used to run down the hallway just to tell me he loved me. Now, even getting a thanks out of him felt like winning the lottery. The days bled into each other. I made meals Daniel didn't eat, folded laundry he had dry cleaned, and watered plants he'd ordered for a touch of green. I tried to connect, suggesting walks, movies, anything, but he always had a call, a meeting, an excuse. "I'm not here to babysit you," he once snapped when I asked if he'd have dinner with me on a Friday night. "I didn't ask you to," I whispered. "I just wanted your company." That was the moment it shifted. He looked at me like I was a problem to be solved, not a mother to be loved. I began to notice things: how his eyes darted away when I entered a room, how he sighed when I spoke too long. I wasn't part of his life, I was a relic of it. And yet I stayed, because I didn't know where else to go. One afternoon, while he was out, I walked barefoot through the yard. The lawn was manicured, not a single blade out of place. Frank would have hated it, loved the wild dandelions, said they were honest flowers. I sat under the oak tree by the fence, the only real thing left. It was there that I met her, Claire. She lived next door, a petite woman in her 80s with hair the color of cotton and a laugh like wind chimes. "You look like someone who needs a friend," she said through the fence. "I suppose I do," I admitted. Claire invited me over that weekend. Her house was smaller, cluttered, warm. It smelled like cinnamon and old paperbacks. We drank tea from chipped mugs and talked about everything: love, grief, how the world had moved too fast and left us behind. "He doesn't see you," Claire said, matter of fact. "He sees a burden." I flinched. "He used to love me." "He probably still does," she said. "But in the way people love childhood memories, not enough to carry them into the future." A week later, Daniel told me he was going on a business trip. "You'll be fine here by yourself?" he asked, not out of concern, but obligation. "Of course," I said, masking the flicker of relief I felt. The house was quiet again, but this time, I chose how to fill the silence. I dug out my old sketchbook. I painted. I baked cookies with Claire. We sat on her porch and watched the stars. For the first time in months, I felt like myself again, more than a ghost walking through someone else's life. And then came the email. Daniel had forwarded it by accident. A message to a real estate agent. "Considering renting the upstairs guest suite. She won't be around much longer anyway." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. The teacup in my hand slipped and shattered on the floor. I didn't cry. Not at first. Then I laughed, a soft, bitter sound. So that was what I had become. a guest with an expiration date. I didn't confront him right away. Instead, I made a plan. I called a lawyer, explained my contributions to the house, showed receipts, the will, Frank's trust. It turned out I had more leverage than Daniel thought. I opened a bank account in my name, transferred what I could. Then I called an old friend from Vermont, Elaine. She ran a community arts center for retirees. "We need someone just like you," she said with a smile I could hear through the phone. "When can you come?" I said soon. Daniel came back from his trip 3 days later, surprised to find me packing. "What's going on?" he asked, frowning. "I'm leaving," I said simply. He laughed, confused. "What? What?" "Because this house was never my home," I said. "You made that very clear." He looked stunned. "Mom didn't be dramatic." "Dramatic?" My voice shook, but I didn't let it crack. "You wrote me off before I was even gone." He opened his mouth, but I cut him off. "You don't get to own my memories, Daniel. And you don't get to silence the part of me that still wants to live." He followed me out to the driveway as I loaded the last of my things into the back of Claire's pickup. She insisted on driving me to the train station herself. "Where will you go?" he asked, arms limp at his sides. "Somewhere I'm wanted." He stood there in his tailored suit, framed by the house he had claimed for himself, looking smaller than I remembered. "You didn't even say goodbye," he said, almost a whisper. I paused. Then I reached into my purse and handed him the letter he wrote me in 5th grade. "You said we'd live together forever." I held on to that. Maybe too long. He looked at the paper, and for a moment, his eyes softened. But I turned away before I could see them harden again. I didn't look back as the train pulled away from the station. Claire sat beside me, knitting something in her lap. "You okay, dear?" I stared out the window, watching suburbs blur into open fields. "No, but I will be." We arrived in Vermont just after sunset. Elaine was waiting at the platform with a huge scarf and a hug that squeezed breath back into my lungs. "You look different," she said, holding me at arm's length. "I left something behind." "Well, you found something too," she said. "Come on. I'll show you where you'll be living." The community center wasn't just a place for art, it was a haven. Elaine had converted the top floor into living quarters for resident artists. My room was small but cozy. A window looked out over the lake, where the moon now shimmered across the black water like a promise. That night, I slept without locking my door. For the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of being forgotten. In the morning, I unpacked only what I loved. My sketchbooks, Frank's worn gloves, a photo of Daniel when he still called me Mommy. I didn't place it by my bed. I wasn't ready for that. I set it on the shelf across the room, still there, but farther. Elaine showed me around the center. There were woodworkers, painters, poets. No one asked my age. No one asked why I left. They just handed me a cup of hot cider and welcomed me into the fold. I taught my first art class that Thursday. It was called Memory on Canvas. 7 seniors showed up, each with a past more colorful than the next. There was George, a retired firefighter who painted flames in oil with astonishing clarity. Teresa, who'd lost her husband in the war and filled every inch of her canvas with sunflowers. And Rita, 91 and nearly blind, who said she just came for the music and the cookies. By the end of the week, I felt like I had roots again. Not the kind that drag you down, but the kind that hold you steady in the wind. Still, Daniel haunted me. Not as a ghost, but as a quiet ache, like an unanswered question echoing in an empty hallway. Sometimes I wondered if he ever looked at that letter I gave him, if he read it, or just threw it in the trash. I didn't call him, and he didn't call me, until 3 months later. It was a Sunday. I had just finished helping Claire hang her watercolor series in the gallery when my phone buzzed. "Daniel, 1 missed call." My fingers froze over the screen. Then a second buzz voicemail. I didn't listen right away. I went for a walk down to the lake, let the breeze chase away the noise in my chest. Only then did I press play. His voice was strained, lower than I remembered. "Mom, it's me. I was cleaning out the office, and I found Dad's watch. The one you used to wind for him every night. I guess I forgot a lot of things. Look, I don't know if you want to talk. I don't blame you if you don't. But I do. I want to. I miss you." Then, more softly, "I miss us." I didn't cry. I didn't smile either. I just sat with the words like they were something fragile and ancient. The next day, I called him back. We didn't talk long, just enough to break the dam. He asked how Vermont was. I told him about the center, about Claire, about George's fire paintings. He laughed. I hadn't heard him laugh like that in years. Then there was a pause. I'm sorry, he said. It was the first time he'd ever said it, and meant it. I know, I replied. Me too. The calls became weekly, then more frequent. Short conversations, but steady. I never said, you hurt me. And he never said, I used you. But we both circled those truths carefully, respectfully, like two people unlearning a language of distance. One afternoon, he asked, why didn't you fight harder to stay? I was standing in front of a blank canvas. I dipped my brush into blue and answered, because love isn't supposed to be a cage. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I didn't understand that until you left. Months passed. Spring thawed the edges of Vermont. The lake rippled with new life. And I painted more than I ever had before. I created a series called The House That Wasn't Mine. The first canvas showed a woman standing in front of a massive home, her shadow extending across the lawn. The second showed her sitting on a train with nothing but a suitcase. The third showed her barefoot in a new room, surrounded by paints and light. When I hung them in the spring exhibit, people stood quietly before them. Some cried, some smiled, some just nodded like they recognized the story as their own. Daniel came to see them. He arrived on a windy Friday, wearing the same coat Frank used to wear. I met him in the gallery. We hugged not tightly, not long, but long enough to remember something good between us. You look, he paused. Stronger. I am. He looked at the paintings. That's you. It's a lot of us, I said. But yes. His eyes lingered on the third canvas. Are you happy here? I am. He nodded. I didn't think I was losing you. I thought I was giving you space. Turns out, I just didn't know how to share mine. That house wasn't the problem, Daniel. It was what we filled it with. He looked at me, more honest than I'd seen in years. Do you think we could start again? Not from the beginning, I said gently. But from where we are? Yes. We walked to the lake. Talked about Dad. About my childhood. About his. About how grief sometimes tricks us into forgetting who we are to each other. I kept that letter, he said. The one from 5th grade. Did you read it? Every week, he whispered. Sometimes more. I reached out and took his hand. It felt unfamiliar at first. Then slowly, like water finding its way back to the riverbed, it felt like home. Not the house. Not the walls. But us. Summer came to Vermont with a slowness I appreciated. No rush. No demands. Just the patient unraveling of days. Daniel stayed for 3 more nights. He didn't ask to stay at my studio apartment over the gallery, and I didn't offer. Instead, Elaine helped him rent a guest cabin down the road, one that smelled of cedar and old pine. Each day, he joined me at the art center. He met George and Teresa, played checkers with Rita, who beat him twice and laughed louder than anyone had heard her laugh in months. He helped Claire plant new irises by the porch, and even fixed the studio's faulty sink without once needing a YouTube tutorial. It was strange to see him like this, quiet, available, unsure. For years, I'd only known him in fragments, the busy executive with 1,000 distractions. Now he was just my son again. Not perfect, but present. I didn't know you could paint, he said one evening, watching me finish the final brushstrokes on a new piece. I didn't know you could listen, I replied, not unkindly. He didn't bristle, just smiled and nodded. Fair. One morning, we drove out to a nearby flea market. I was looking for old frames. He was looking for something he wouldn't name. He paused at a stall filled with vintage pocket watches. This one, he said, holding up a gold one with a small dent near the clasp. Looks just like Dad's. It does, I said, my breath catching a little. I keep thinking about him lately, Daniel admitted. How he'd probably shake his head at me. Tell me I forgot what matters. He wouldn't shame you, I said. But he'd remind you. He always did that gently. I miss him. So do I. The next day, I found a letter outside my door. My name was written in Daniel's neat handwriting. I read it sitting by the lake, my feet in the water, dragonflies hovering like silent guards. Mom, I don't know when I stopped seeing you as a person. I think I got scared after Dad died, after the world sped up, after you started needing things I didn't know how to give. I told myself I was protecting my life, my space, my sanity. But what I was really doing was shrinking the definition of love until there was no room left for you in it. I'm sorry for making you feel small. You were never small to me. I don't expect forgiveness. But I hope you'll let me keep walking beside you now. At your pace. Love. Daniel. I folded the letter carefully, and placed it between the pages of my sketchbook. Then I stood and walked back, leaving wet footprints on the dock behind me, marks of someone who had learned to stay soft in the face of sorrow. By August, Daniel had to return to the city. He stood beside his rental car with the trunk half open, hesitating. "Come visit when you're ready," I told him. "Not out of guilt, just when it feels real." He nodded. "Can I send you something in the meantime? You could try writing," I teased. He laughed. "I meant a gift. But okay, deal." We hugged. Tighter this time. No words as he got in and drove away. I waved until the car disappeared beyond the birch trees. Then I went inside and painted the way the wind had curled around his collar as he left. Weeks passed. I taught more classes. The art center flourished. Rita sold her first painting, a blur of purples and pinks she called My Garden before the war. Teresa wrote her late husband's name into every sunflower she painted. George gave his first workshop on light and shadow to a room full of eager retirees. And I painted a new series, Things We Try to Say Too Late. In one, a boy sits on a staircase, holding a toy airplane, waiting for a father who never comes. In another, a woman stands in front of a locked door, holding a birthday cake for someone who no longer lives there. In the final piece, two people, mother and son, stand on opposite sides of a window. The glass is cracked, but not broken. It was Claire who suggested I submit them to the Vermont State Gallery for the fall exhibit. "They speak," she said, "and not just to me." I didn't expect to be accepted, but I was. The opening night was brisk, filled with people holding wine glasses and speaking in the half-whisper of reverence. My 3 pieces were hung side by side under soft lighting. People lingered. Some took photos. Some cried. One woman touched my hand and whispered, "You made me remember my mother." Daniel showed up 2 hours into the exhibit, breathless, having driven straight from the city. "I almost didn't make it," he said. "But you did." He stood in front of the final canvas for a long time. Then he asked, "Is that us?" I nodded. He didn't say anything for a while. Then, "I'm glad the glass didn't break." "Me too." That night, we walked back to my apartment under a sky stitched with stars. He carried my coat, even though I told him I wasn't cold. Somewhere between the gallery and the porch steps, he said, "I've been thinking about moving. Out of the city, maybe to Boston, or New Haven, closer to here. Not too close, but close enough." I smiled. "You don't have to change your life for me, Daniel." "I know," he said, "but I want to change it for me." Later, I sat alone in the studio. The gallery was empty now, the lights dimmed. I turned to a fresh canvas. This one would be different. It would show 2 hands, one older, lined with time, and the other younger, reaching out but not quite touching. In the background, a house not mine or his, but something between. Something shared. Not a home built of rooms and wood, but of hard conversations, second chances, and the quiet bravery it takes to begin again. A week after the exhibit, the Vermont State Gallery called. "We've had a lot of interest in your series," the curator said. "A collector in New Hampshire wants to purchase all 3. Full price. No negotiation." I stood in my small kitchen, the phone pressed to my ear, the kettle just beginning to hiss. I blinked at the sunlight pooling on the floor like something sacred. "I'm honored," I said, "but I need to think about it." That night, I looked at the 3 paintings again. Things we try to say too late. They weren't just art, they were moments I had lived, grief I had survived. Selling them felt like closing a chapter one hadn't quite finished writing. But maybe that was okay. Maybe it was time. I called the curator the next morning. "Tell the collector yes," I said, "but ask if I can keep them until the end of the fall season. I want to sit with them a little longer." As autumn crept in, the leaves in Vermont burned with every shade of gold, crimson, and rust. The lake mirrored it all, holding the fire of change like a secret it couldn't keep. Daniel came up again, this time with someone. Her name was Megan, a soft-spoken woman with curious eyes and a quiet strength in her posture. "She's a friend," Daniel said quickly, but I saw the way his hand brushed her shoulder when he thought I wasn't looking. The way her eyes lingered on him in moments of silence. We all had dinner at Claire's that night. Megan offered to help set the table, laughed at Rita's jokes, and asked me about my art as if it mattered. Later, as we stood on the porch, Daniel looked at me. "She reminds me of you," he said. I raised an eyebrow. "Is that a compliment?" He smiled. "The highest one." Over the next few weeks, I noticed something inside me start to soften, not toward Daniel alone, but toward the idea of us, of rebuilding what we once had, not by pretending the past didn't happen, but by weaving it into something stronger. One night, after an open studio event, I sat down and wrote Daniel a letter of my own. Daniel, I spent so many years fearing the end. The end of your father, the end of our home, the end of being needed. But what I've learned here is that endings are never the whole story. They're just places we pause, catch our breath, and begin again differently. I don't need you to be the boy you were, or the man you think I wanted. I just want you to be here, as you are. And I promise, I'll be here too. Not behind you, not above you, but beside you. Love always. Mom. I didn't mail it. I left it on the kitchen table of the cabin he and Megan were staying in before their drive back. The next morning, as he hugged me goodbye, he whispered, I got your letter. I hoped you would. He pulled back, eyes glassy. Do you think we'll be okay now? We already are, I said. A few days later, I received an unexpected package in the mail. Inside was a leather-bound journal. On the first page, written in Megan's graceful cursive, a book of what comes next for you and Daniel to fill together. Taped beside it, a note from Daniel. Let's not waste any more time. Want to start this with me? Page 1 is yours. I didn't know what to write at first, but eventually, I took a pen and began. Today, the sun came through the window and landed on the floor exactly where you used to sit as a boy when you played with your toy trains. I remembered the sound of your laughter. And I didn't cry. I smiled. In October, I returned to the gallery to retrieve my 3 paintings before they were shipped to the collector. But as I stood before them, I realized something strange. I no longer felt tied to them. They were stories I had needed to tell, but they weren't my whole story anymore. The woman trapped behind glass was me once. But now, she had stepped outside. Into light. Into life. That night, I painted something new. Not for exhibit, not for sale, just for me. It showed 2 figures walking down a dirt path in the woods. Not holding hands, but close enough that their shadows touched. The trees were golden, the sky pale lavender, the air alive with wind. At the bottom, I painted 4 words in small print. We found our way. Winter arrived sooner than expected. Vermont snow doesn't whisper. It crashes in and buries everything. But for the first time, I didn't dread it. My windows frosted over with a quiet kind of magic, and each morning the world looked new again, clean, still, almost sacred. Daniel sent postcards. Not emails. Not texts. Postcards. With messy handwriting and watercolored edges that he'd painted himself. Mom. Tried painting like you said. I still suck at trees. But I like how quiet it makes me feel. P.S. Megan says hi. And yes, we're official now. Love, D. I hung that one above my desk. Then came another. Just visited that corner cafe where you and Dad used to take me for hot chocolate after Little League. Funny how you remember things better when you stop trying to forget. I wish we could go back there together sometime. If you're up for it. I'll drive. I wrote back in thick, textured paper I'd saved from my gallery workshop. Only if you promise not to spill whipped cream on your shirt like you used to. Also, I want marshmallows. Around mid-January, Elaine offered me a permanent position at the community center. Not just leading workshops, but curating monthly exhibits, organizing programs, mentoring new artists. I can't pay you much, she said. But the apartment's yours for as long as you want it. We want you here. I stood in the middle of the studio as she said it, surrounded by half-done canvases and the smell of turpentine and pine wood. I want to stay, I said. And I meant it. For the first time in decades, I had built something that didn't belong to anyone else. No husband, no son, no ghost of who I used to be. This life was mine, and it was enough. Daniel came back in February. Just him this time. He arrived unannounced, holding 2 coffees and a paper bag of donuts from a shop I hadn't been to in years. I figured you'd still like jelly-filled, he said. I took one, grinning. I never stopped. We sat by the lake, which was frozen solid, reflecting a pale sky full of hush and cloud. He kicked at the snowbank, then said, I've been thinking of selling the house. I turned to him. Really? He nodded. I bought it to prove something. That I could finally control something. That I was the grown-up. But I didn't like who I became in it. I stayed quiet. Then he looked up. I want to find something smaller. Somewhere I don't feel like I'm shouting to be heard. I looked at him for a long moment. Or somewhere you don't silence the people you love. He nodded. That too. That night, we sat on my tiny couch, knees touching. I brought out the journal Megan had given us. Your turn, I said, flipping to a blank page. He took the pen, hesitated. I don't know what to write. Start with today. He did. Today, I sat beside my mother in the snow and didn't feel like a stranger. That's enough. In March, we made good on that postcard promise. He drove us back to the cafe. It hadn't changed much, still the same wobbly table in the back corner, still the same bell above the door. I watched him order our drinks, watched the cashier smile at him like she liked his laugh. And I thought about how strange it was to feel proud of your grown child, not for success, or money, or title, but for how gently they now hold the world. We talked for hours. He asked me about Dad's final years, things he had avoided before. I told him the hard parts, and the beautiful ones too. At one point, he said, I wish I'd been there more. You were there enough, I told him. And now you're here. Spring returned. The ice melted, the gallery filled with light again, and the center hosted a new exhibit called Remnants and Returns. I contributed a new series, Letters Never Sent. Each canvas was shaped like an envelope, but instead of words, I filled them with color violet grief, crimson apologies, pale yellow forgiveness. One was nearly all white, with only a single charcoal line in the Centera silence I had once mistaken for peace. Daniel stood in front of it for a long time. That one's about me, isn't it? I smiled softly. It was. Now it's just about silence. That evening, he stayed late, helped clean up after the exhibit. As we packed up the last wine glasses, he asked, Do you ever wish you could go back? To the house. He nodded. No, I said, but I do wish I'd left sooner. He didn't flinch, just took it in. I wish I'd asked you to, he finally said. In May, Megan visited again. This time, she brought her daughter from a previous marriage, a shy 9-year-old named Eliza, who wore headphones and carried a sketchpad like a shield. I invited her to join my children's art class at the center. She shook her head. Then, slowly, over the next few days, she started coming to the sessions just to watch. One afternoon, after most of the kids had gone, I found her in the back room, quietly painting. She'd made a picture of a tree house surrounded by stars. Who lives there? I asked. She shrugged. Maybe me. Maybe someone who doesn't feel alone anymore. I nodded. That's a good someone to be. Summer came again, and with it, peace. Not the loud, cinematic kind. Just steady peace. Morning tea on the porch, the sound of birds returning to their nests, laughter echoing from the studio down the hall. Daniel came up every other weekend. He brought Eliza sometimes. We'd bake cookies, go for walks, paint side by side. He still called me Mom, but with something new in his voice. Something quieter, grateful, human. One Sunday, he asked, Do you want to visit the house before it sells? I hesitated, then nodded. We went together. It was empty now, all the furniture gone, the walls bare. Sunlight came through the windows, unfiltered and sharp. I walked through each room slowly, running my fingers along the walls, remembering the quiet arguments, the small kindnesses, the cold silences. I stopped in the kitchen, the place where I first realized I was no longer wanted. Daniel stood behind me. It doesn't look like I remember it. It never does, I said. He handed me something, a small, wrapped bundle. Inside, Frank's gardening gloves. I found them in the basement. Thought you might want them back. I held them like something sacred. I never really let them go. We didn't stay long. As we walked down the front steps, Daniel looked at the house one last time. Then he turned to me and said, Let's go home. And I knew he didn't mean the house. He meant wherever we were, walking side by side, ready to write what came next.